Thank you for staying with us. Now let's get the show on the road. It is no longer news that we are faced with security challenges in this country, and try as the government would, the problem is just intractable. So, in a bid to save lives and property, certain states in the Federation have come together or on their own found solutions. Well, what we assume will be solutions to this problem. And case in point is the Southwest and the governors, some of the governors in the North. So are we seeing light at the end of the tunnel? How much are these initiatives going to help our situation? These are the problems, these are the things we're going to be talking about this morning. And we are being joined from Abuja by the Special Assistant to the Borno State Governor, Mr. Issa Gusau. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good.
How are you?
And we are expecting Mr. Onyekachi Adekoya to join us in Lagos. But we have Mr. Issa Gusau with us, so let's just get on with it. Mr. Gusau, we have Amotekun in the southwest, and we have Shege Kafasa in the north. How much do you think that these initiatives are going to help our current situation?
Well, I think a lot of these initiatives are largely inspired by the contributions of the civilian JTF in Borno State. The whole issue is that everybody is getting to understand that most of the time, people that are on ground, residents who are more familiar with their territories, are more likely to respond better in terms of managing issues of security. Of course, we know that for the interests of national unity and maybe to avoid some kind of local partisanship, the Nigerian armed forces has a policy in which most of the time people are deployed outside their states, to go and operate. Soldiers are taken from the north to the south most of the time, and then the same thing applies to police, and other paramilitary, organizations. But maybe at the time that was introduced, no one would have thought that we'll get to a situation where we'll have an alien group like the Boko Haram, which will go as far as, carrying out suicide bombings. Nobody would have thought that kind of situation, would happen in the country. Nobody probably anticipated we would be having the extent of kidnappings that we now have, in some part of the country. Nobody thought that was going to, happen. So I think the whole issue is just a response to the changing times, or let me say interesting times. The whole idea is emanating from community policing. A lot of people have come to the realization that most of the time, those who are on ground, have a better understanding of the security issues. And of course, that most of our communities in Nigeria, are remote. When you bring a military man, for instance, to Maiduguri to go after the Boko Haram, like the case was, in 2012, the Boko Haram fighters have a way of entering certain streets. They know how to, navigate their ways out, and then most of these soldiers probably wouldn't know that.
Okay, Mr. Gusau, we really have to take a very quick break. We'll come back and you pick it up from where you left off, please. Do stay with us. Thank you for staying with us. And while we're on that break, we're joined by Onyekachi Adekoya, who's a security expert and Provost Marshal of the licensed security operatives here in Nigeria. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Good morning, viewers.
Yeah, well, we'll get back to Mr. Gusau, who was talking about the situation on ground. Mr. Gusau, can you pick up where you left off?
Yeah, I think I've largely said most of what I was talking about. Like just a recap. The whole idea of community members getting involved, in establishing the security establishments, is a response to change in our security situation. We have serious situations that nobody envisaged, nobody thought we were going to get to where we are today. So I think a lot of these responses are to tackle that. And I think these approaches should be the new normal. We will be making a mistake to say, assuming we are able to regain peace, which by the grace of God will happen, we should not sit back and assume that we should just ignore this. I think it should come to stay, perhaps with a lot of modifications in such a way that a lot of people who get involved now will not turn out to be menace to the society. But these security responses should be a new normal to complement the efforts of the military and other components of the Nigerian Armed Forces.
I need to bring this back to you because your governor was quoted as saying at some point that 100,000 soldiers recruited would help to solve this Boko Haram matter once and for all. How does that tie into you talking about these other responses by, well, civilian JTF and the joint operations by the different states coming together?
The fact of the matter is that if you are to go by the UN standard of the number of security personnel that should be available, in ratio to population, you discover that what Nigeria would require will be far more than that. And that is exactly why the effort has to be complemented by volunteers, by community-based security establishments. And then, the military, the police, the DSS, and all that we have cannot work in isolation of the community. Whatever it is that they will do would depend on community intelligence. And then one of the critical roles that most of these organizations, these local security outfits, normally do, is they are extremely good in generating intelligence within the community. They know the communities very well. They practically live there. They work with the people there. They interact with everyone. So they know everything. Like in Borno State, for instance, you'd be shocked to know that no matter how a Boko Haram member tries to conceal himself, the moment a civilian JTF comes across, a Boko Haram suspect, no matter how he conceals, they have a way of identifying them. And that is because they are integral part of the society. They know everyone. And then because they have been there for a number of years, they know the culture, they know the people. So the moment they see you, they tend to identify you, and that's why government must continue to support them, like Governor Babagana Umar Zulum is doing. You, of course, know that as soon as he came in June, he increased the allowances of the civilian JTF. He automated their payment system. He has given them more than 300 vehicles in addition to sending some of them on training. So much is being done, by the governor, and I believe, other governors are doing, their best, and those who are not doing should emulate the governor.
Okay, let me bring it down here. Onyekachi, you've heard Issa talk about what should be done, the local response. But the clamor so far across the country has been the service chiefs must go. One would think that it's the service chiefs that, indeed, there was that argument. Should it be the service chiefs or should it be the president? Some are calling for the resignation of the president. Some are saying change the service chiefs. But Issa talked about availability of personnel and local knowledge. Do you think that's the way to go?
So I need to be sure what you say now. You're talking about the president, the service chief,
Calls for
local
the president to
knowledge.
go, calls for the sack of the service chiefs. But Issa has just talked about the need for personnel on ground based on the US standards.
Yeah.
And then local knowledge.
So I think I take it from the local knowledge. When you deal with the issue of security, you are dealing with two issues basically. The issue of place and space. Place and space. Because security incidents don't come out of the blues, okay? And criminals don't operate in air. They have to have an operational base, and they have a territorial space of interest within which they operate. Now, what Issa is saying, and I'm quite impressed with his analysis because it goes straight to the heart of the issue. When you bring people from the outside in to deal with local issues, we must also appreciate the fact that dealing with security, you must take a local approach. The more sustainable approach is a local approach, and you deal with the resources you have on the ground. People who understand the terrain, who understand the people, their way of life. The language, you know, we all come from villages and communities. If you see a stranger and a foreigner in your village, you know, no matter what, he will give himself off one way or the other. Now, if you have local intelligence on ground, but you don't have local response capability on ground, all you will have is actionable intelligence, but you will have to rely greatly on the resource of the person who has the responsibility to act. Whether or not he is willing to act and able to act at that moment will be completely out of your control.
The way I understand this now is that you have the intel
correct
in the community.
Yes.
But action can only come from Abuja.
God bless you. That's the perfect analogy, you see. But you see, also in dealing with incidents of security, time is also of the essence. You have intelligence. You are seeing the situation. You need to act. And
you can't.
It's like like the service industry, when you talk about your value chain. If you're along the line of a value chain, you have a resource that is external to you which you do not control, you cannot guarantee total delivery of service. Security is service. You see? So it's service. So how do you guarantee? You have a governor who says he's the chief security officer of the state. Funny though, I think the then governor of Zamfara said he did resign as CSO of the state, because essentially he had looked at the value chain. The critical part, the most critical part, response. We can always get intelligence. So you now see the federal government come to this speak of community policing, which I've always argued is not community policing in the true sense of community policing. It will look more like a community PR policy of the federal police force. We have the spy police. They have a different uniform. You will have the community police officers who are volunteers. People taken from the community, one person. What's the rank? A constable. Who is a constable? That's just where you start from when you join the police force. You will give the constable a different uniform. So you have the police uniform, you have the spy police uniform, you have the constable community policing uniform. It would appear as though we are just going around in circles. The constable would not bear arm. He will only be able to effect a civilian arrest, which anybody can. But then response is not there. So at the local issue, we must understand that the structure we have is true, it's not sustainable. Nigeria has become too diverse to be operated centrally from Abuja. You will lose time, you will lose chance, you will lose opportunity to deal with local issues on the ground as you deem fit based on local context. So in general speaking security, we talk about a context-based approach to security. On the other hand, you talked about the president and the service chiefs. Well, the buck stops at the table of the president. So I see him as a CEO. We are, those of us in private practice, if you run an organization, you are totally responsible and absolutely responsible for that organization. The service chiefs are appointees of the CEO. The chief of staff is an appointee of the CEO. The NSA is an appointee also of the CEO. So ultimately, the ultimate responsibility rests on the table of the CEO. So if we're going to ask questions on the state of security and performance so far, we have no business with the service chief. We didn't elect the service chief. We elected the president, and also on the campaign promise to deal with the issue of security. So yes, there is that narrative to the discussion to say, leave the service chiefs alone. They are only there at the will of the president, at the behest of the president, basically. So put the buck back at the table. Now, another dimension to this is very interesting. There's a political dimension to this. When we elect governors, and we say the fundamental business of government is security. How do we, even in Nigeria, elect governors who cannot do anything about our security? I would have loved a situation where on the ballot, the issue being discussed will also be security. Mr. Governor, how would you improve security? What are the things you need to do differently? But in our current setup, the governors cannot be responsible for security. We
So
don't have a problem.
You cannot therefore engage him on that.
You cannot.
Because the Constitution has mapped out his powers,
Absolutely.
showing that he doesn't have any
Absolutely.
power
It cannot even be a basis for re-election. And you see where we are in this country, security has come circumstantially to the front burner. Everything we talk about every day, we can talk about business, the economy, GDP, we will come back to security. The government, state governments can make laws, they can adjudicate. Of course, you have state high court, state courts, you have the federal high courts, you have the state house of assembly, but you don't have state police. So the triad, the three legs upon which governance should stand is not effective when it comes to the issue of enforcement. You can enact laws, you can adjudicate, you cannot enforce at a local level. We are now a country of over 200 million people. The population is expanding. The complexities in each individual communities is becoming quite diverse. And response is now more critical than it used to be, and we need to shorten the time of response. So when you look at the issues of how many people died at this border post into Maiduguri, I forgot the name of the place now. Oh, you had over 30 people die. No response, because the response you had was federal. A governor who knows that he will come and campaign again on security would have done something if he could.
Okay. Mr. Gusau, let me bring this back to you. He mentioned state police, and state police was big talk a few years ago. All the talk about it seems to have died down a bit. What are your thoughts about this state police business? Has its time come? Is it what people are now replacing with community police?
I know most of the time when arguments, come up with regards to whether state governments can afford, to fund the state police, the argument on the part of the federal government has always been that some states are battling with even issues of payment of salaries. But of course we know that the creation of state police, if that will come, would not come in isolation of the funding components. If there's going to be a state police, of course, there has to be an increased funding, on the part of the federal government, which gets, the lion's share, of the country's resources. So I think that argument can be dealt with. And there are also those who would argue that there's also the fear that some governors would want to use the state police against their political opponents. Well, the truth of the matter is that most governors have influences over commissioners of police. So if there is that fear that governors would use, state police against opponents, I think the fact remains that those who want to exercise such powers, can still do it, whether they're state police or not. I think state police has become an absolute necessity, given the peculiarity of our situation. Unless, if we are really, really serious about handling the security situation in the country, I think it's something that we have to do as a child of necessity. Perhaps in the process of creating the law, establishing the state police, certain provisions can be brought in to protect the opposition. For instance, if there's going to be a kind of regulatory board, the law can require that the chairman of the major opposition party in the state should be a member of the board. You can always find ways to reduce some of these excesses so that there will be a collective, approach to administering the state police. But I think it is time for it, because from all indication we seem to be having all kinds of security challenges, and of course it has to do with our population. There's a problem of poverty. There's a problem of education. I think we really need to to be concerned about all of this.
Do you agree with him?
Absolutely, there's no argument at all. I agree, absolutely. So the issue of funding doesn't really come up for me. I have my friends in the unions, and once you talk about privatizing some MDAs or some businesses of government that government has no business doing, it's because when you look at our budget, there's what we call securenomics. That's the economics of security, or securematics, when you talk about the mathematical side of security also. We have a budget, and 70% of the budget goes to recurrent. It's not even sustainable. Government has its hand in too many pies. You have plenty MDAs, plenty parastatals, plenty directors, plenty permanent secretaries, places we don't have any business being in. So, how did most of these agencies come up? Let's create employment. Create this agency. You create that. There was a time when money was not a problem. Now, money is a problem.
Close the agency. Is that what you're suggesting?
No, I'm even beginning to say that the way we are not set up as a business. Let's look at Nigeria as a business. There are a lot of lost leading agencies we have no business in. Each of these parastatals, ministries, they have capital budgets. When you say we're spending XYZ on capital expenditure, sometimes we talk about corruption, and we create the conditions for corruption. I am saying it's time for Nigeria to run a smarter budget, a more lean budget, a more agile budget, a budget that addresses the pains and the needs of the people, a budget that will catalyze growth and development in the country. Security costs money, which is where I'm really coming to. When you don't have the money to spend, the federal government did admit last year that they need to employ 100,000 more policemen to bring the number to 400,000. But there's no budget. We need more personnel in the army, in the customs. We have over 1,300 known footpaths. We say we have closed the border. Did we really close the border?
Did we close the footpaths?
We didn't close nothing. You can try. In some parts of the north, everywhere is a road. Anywhere you face is a road.
Okay, just hold your thoughts.
Yeah.
We'll come back in a moment to continue this conversation. Please stay with us. Thank you for staying with us. We still have Onyekachi Adekoya, who happens to be a complete Nigerian, speaks Igbo, speaks Yoruba, speaks Hausa. Do you speak Yoruba too?
No. I may learn that very soon.
Okay, Onyekachi, you were talking about the situation on ground.
Yeah.
The cost of running security.
Yes.
As it is now. I don't know if you caught a little bit of what was playing back when we were off air. Someone that was in the interview talked about the police uniforms not even being consistent. We do know that some police commands or some police stations are not even effectively funded as they should. The cost of security, but yet everyone collects a security vote. So the question is, what are the states and indeed the local governments collecting their security votes for?
God bless you. It's a good question. So when people talk about cost and how are you going to fund the police, it's not even, it's a no-brainer. The states can, the states that can should, the states that think that they can should go ahead and fund. The issue of security votes, in a real sense of application of the vote, there's a need for it. Whether the sum allotted and then budgeted is maybe is too much or is too little, it will be based on the local conditions on the ground. So I don't want to go too much into the security vote, because in security, you must have some level of funding for exigencies and some state issues that you won't bring to the fore. So the vote is needed. But I mean, yes, I hear the argument of accountability when it comes to the vote. But in terms of can we pay? Yes, we can pay. In 2019, the federal government did put out a national security strategy that said it was going to be people-centric, meaning that you focus on the people, their livelihood, their aspirations, and how to support those aspirations. You must be willing to pay for security. Security is expensive. This is the point I'm making. Our problem is expensive and essential. Our problem in Nigeria is that we see security as a cost center. We don't see it as a service. We don't see it as an enabler of business. We don't see it as an enabler of economic development. So we can talk about our economic development strategy and the policies, whether it's its needs or whatever strategy we're coming up with. But we think security lasts. Someone wants to bring $10 billion into Nigeria. The first thing he's thinking about is, how will I get out with my 10 billion? And some profits. Because capital is a coward. So government must produce a conducive environment for capital. But you must be willing to spend. So the point I'm making is, for us to fund security, perhaps we need to get out of some unnecessary expenditure. Give an example. I know some people will come for me after this. What are we doing with the refineries when we have Dangote refinery coming up? The funds we spend on turnaround maintenance every year and the money to spend on subsidy, we have areas to pull out funding from. Because if you look at Ghana today, what Ghana has done basically is to provide a conducive environment for capital. So capital is flighting from Nigeria to Ghana because of safety. And we say we are the giant of Africa, we have the biggest economy, but what is our spend on security? So the states can fund. Are we very effective with the means and ways of generating revenue for each state? I don't think so. Not yet. Not yet. And because of our checkered history with the military and where we have come from and the way we have come, the federal government has no business holding on to lion's share of the resources.
You know, Onyekachi, I would love you to continue this conversation here. But there are other part about, yes, the states can fund, but what about the political side, where the governors or the CEOs of the states or the local governments are going to use this policing apparatus, this security apparatus against their opponents?
How is that different from...
No, think about that. Let me switch this over to,
that's fine.
to Issa. Issa, the states can fund, but the pressure on the states also to provide infrastructure is there. So one begins to wonder at the end of the day, how does the state executive manage the balance of funding the security apparatus, providing infrastructure, and all of that? Also, weighing also on that part about the need to bring in prayer into this matter. I mean, your governor also asked that people should pray for the security of the state as well. How would that all tie in?
Well, earlier I talked about the fact that if we are going the way of creating state police, it will come with the funding components. Like we know, the federal government controls more than 50% of the country's resources. So if states will be empowered by a new law or a constitutional provision to establish state police, the same law would have to provide responsibilities in which the federal government, must come up with a formula through which funding dedicated to this state police will be provided, statutorily to all the states. So I think the issue of funding, can be addressed. And then the issue of governors using state police against opposition, like I said before, you have had many instances where opposition complain that governors use commissioners of police of the federal government to intimidate opposition. So that simply means that governors who are interested in going after oppositions do not necessarily have to wait for state police. They can as well do that, with the federal police. However, one way to go is for the National Assembly to look at possibilities in which the opposition can be brought into the laws establishing, the state police, maybe in terms of regulation. The chairman of the major opposition of any state can be part of part of a regulatory body, on the state police. Like you have at the National Assembly, the law requires that the Public Account Committee is usually headed, by the minority in the National Assembly. So you can as well, have, this kind of laws. And then with regards to the issue of prayers, like what the governor has always said is that we are not just praying and holding our arms. We are combining multiple approaches. Like I said, from May 29, when Professor Babagana Omar Zulum became the governor of Borno State, he has regularly increased the number of civilian GTF hunters and vigilantes and deployed them to each of 27 local government areas. He has consistently been giving support, to the military, to the police, and paramilitary, and all of them have attested to that. And this support will continue. And you know that he has been going to virtually all the 312 wards across the state to feel the pulse, and any place that he visited, the first thing he has always been concerned about is security. He normally would meet with the community leaders and identify their areas of need, and if they need to have more vehicles or more men, he normally approves that. Of course, most of these people that are usually employed are usually vetted by the DSS to for their integrity. And then I would also say, I read when I was coming today, I read an opinion. Somebody was calling the governor's call for a day of fasting, as a strange. And then that same person was trying to compare with America, that this kind of things do not happen in the United States. And I said, probably the person wasn't very familiar with the American history. If you take a look at the American history, for more than 200 years, the United States has a day of Thanksgiving and praises that is usually marked with a federal holiday on the fourth Thursday of every November. In addition to that, America has what they call a National Prayer Day that is usually celebrated, that is usually marked on the first Thursday of every May of every year. That of last year was marked on the 2nd of May. This year's will be marked on the 7th of May. Next year's will be marked on the 6th of May. The other year, 2022, will be marked on the 5th of May. And then these days are set aside for Americans, to go to their places of worship and pray for America's, prosperity, for peace, and all that. So if countries like that will take, and then when you go back to years back, you discover that states like Georgia, Maryland, Virginia, and a couple of that had days where they declared official fasting days as a result of challenges. When you go to the when you go through the American history, so it is not a normal thing. It is something that we consider very very necessary. And then whatever it is that we are doing as humans, we must recognize that there is a superior being there who has all the powers. And then you energize the soldiers at the front lines. You energize the civilian JTF, those who are doing it, knowing that there are, we all of us come together to pray for them, energizes them. And I think that by the special grace of God, we will eventually get over the security situation.
Okay. All right. I wanted to come back to Onyekachi, but let me read this tweet out to you. Someone's asking us a question. It says, calling on Nigerians to stop blame game and focus on solution good.
Absolutely.
It says, is Neota and Alero prepared to walk the way, it says, to lead the way and walk their talk? It says, are you prepared to get your team at Channels TV to fully be involved? Of course, that's why we're talking about it. We are involved. We walk our talk as best as we could. John Adebukola says that everyone playing their roles in national development, but this is not expecting a system where things are upside down. I'm trying to get that security. First, Akimboewa is saying that the high level of security challenges we're having in our country shows DSS is no longer relevant in gathering intelligence. It says time to overhaul. Charles Ndubisi says, if the governors cannot be held responsible for security and they are handicapped in that regard, why then do they collect security votes? And I think you talked about that in when you talked the last time.
Yeah.
The question of bringing everybody on board, getting everybody to buy into this. Someone was talking, says the problem in Nigeria is a trust problem. The level of trust is eroded completely. So to get the citizens to even believe that it's possible, if I take my responsibility, even in the security bit, if I take responsibility, things can work. If three of us take responsibility, we can all galvanize towards a particular point. It's hard. A lot of people think it's not possible. So how do we even begin to move forward?
Three problems here. First, a problem of leadership. Second, a problem of visioning. Third, a problem of messaging. So if you look at Zamfara State and Borno State, for example, you can see a bit of a departure from the norm. Zamfara State governor came in, went to Dubai, met with some people, though we in the association kicked against it a bit, that, I mean, you could also speak to us in here. But came back, declared amnesty, started some innovative things. Incidents in Zamfara began to die down. And Zamfara, to some extent, is enjoying some relative progress with the issues they are dealing with. Yes, some of the issues are entrenched, they are dealing with it. So, a problem of leadership. A leader must show the way and go the way. Visioning. If we have leadership, people to come up, in our small areas of discussion, and what the guy who said his channel's willing to come and walk the talk. Part of walking the talk is elevating the discussion. Let's elevate the level of conversation beyond parochialism, beyond all the centrifugal sentiments we have. Let's have issue-based discussions. Look at the issues, look at the problems, look at the limitations of resources we have at hand, and let's find a way forward. Messaging. How do you get the people involved? So you need to go to them, sell the vision. Who is selling that vision? Someone saw the vision in Dubai. Someone saw the vision in Ghana. What vision, national vision, can we say we are selling in Nigeria today? Forget Nigeria, maybe it's a federal. In your states, in your community, how are we engaging in community to message correctly? So those three issues, and maybe, yes, we need God. In our national anthem, there's God. In our national pledge, there is God. When we take oaths of office, we call on God. So calling on God, we're not new to it as Nigerians. Okay, so yes, maybe the Lord will help us one way or the other. We get the right kind of leaders who will help move us forward. But the people need to know that if there is no leadership, a leadership that creates a vision, that walks its talk and sells the right message, I was listening to Senator Ekweremadu speak on, I think it was Hard Talk with your colleague. Okay. And according to him, he said, hard copy. So he says he doesn't see the security situation getting any better. That's what Nigerians don't know, according to him. Now, do I agree? To some extent, yes. If you continue to do the same thing you are doing again and again, even at a point where the conditions and the rug under your feet is shifting, and you continue to hope for the same result, you're probably not doing the right thing. So we are ripe for a change in security approach. And it will start from the common man, elevating the conversations. You cannot drive economic development without fixing the issues of security. So we must bring security back up. You don't talk budget and then you come and talk security last. You don't talk political strategy, economic development strategy, then you speak security last. You don't build a 5 billion naira house and then after building, you begin to think about security. There are new concepts in approach to security. There's something called sited, where you inculcate the elements of security even into building design. So people, I think there's a state in Australia that has taken the concept of sited into how they design the space for communal living. How do you, so we ban Okadas in Lagos, which is good. But what infrastructure do we have for people to walk? Where are the sidewalks? Where are the sidewalks? So we need those sidewalks. And some people are lamenting about the ban of Okada. And again, I would to God that somebody would tell them a bit of the reason why, and maybe they calm down. But we all travel abroad. We get on the metro. Sometimes you need to trek 25 minutes to get to the metro station. Nobody is complaining. Our relatives are all wearing canvas abroad. And, you know, they don't understand that people need to trek. Because you can't go about taking a taxi, it's expensive. But when we come back to Nigeria, you want to go 2 streets behind your street, you are looking for Okada. You are looking for Keke. But when you travel, you trek. So 2 issues. Messaging. We message the people correctly. We tell them the why, show them the how, and show them the where. We get their buy-in. Then we create some of these infrastructures to enable some of these conversations that we want to have. So I think these are some of the issues we need to look at to help us get out of where we are. We have put security for too long at the back bench. So we need to bring security to the fore.
Okay, we need to start winding down now. So, Mr. Gusau, can you just quickly answer this question as briefly as you can? You have 1 minute. What are your thoughts about the agency being set up to rehabilitate repentant insurgents?
I would tell you that no matter how good the intentions might be, the timing is absolutely wrong. No matter how good, it might be a very good thing. And you know, whatever policy that one may be thinking about bringing, timing is very critical. So I don't think it's a good idea for one to be thinking about an agency that will rehabilitate a Boko Haram that is still killing people. No matter, it might be a good idea, but the timing is absolutely wrong. That's my thought.
What do you think?
I beg to differ a bit. I know we've agreed for a long time up to this point, but you need to have a lot of approaches to issues of security. You need to look at the soft side and the hard side. Okay, you spent how much? Look at the cost. What's it costing us? Over 10 years, we'll spend how much on this Boko Haram issue?
And lost how many lives?
And lost how many lives? Mm-hmm. Can we swallow our pride a bit and look at if there is another alternative? In military strategy, there's something called you build a golden gate. You push your opposition or your enemy to a point where you also create a back channel for them to retrace their steps. So while we dangle the carrot, we should not let go of the stick. So it's a carrot and stick approach.
That backdoor has been there. Do they have to create an agency? That's channeling money into another agency, again, employment, creating secretariat and all that.
We come back to the problem in Nigeria. Effective leadership and efficient use of resources. Sometimes it's not about the strategy. On paper, we have a lot of good policies. It comes to the implementation.
Mm.
We've got to just go now, and all I have to do now is to thank both gentlemen who joined us on this segment, Mr. Issa Gusau, who is the Special Assistant to the Governor of Borno State. Thank you for joining us, as well as Mr. Onyekachi Adekoya, Security Consultant. Thank you very much for joining us.